At the heart of Chor Leoni's mission lies a commitment to the creation of choral works for tenor and bass voices. Each season, the choir premieres roughly 20 new compositions, and once a year, Chor Leoni engages in a special commissioning project called C4, the Canadian Choral Composition Competition. This project puts out a call across Canada for work samples from Canadian composers of any age or stage in their careers. And from these submissions, 3 composers are chosen and are then commissioned to write a work for Chor Leoni. Along the way, the composers work collaboratively with the organization to conceive and score their works, and near the premiere, are flown to Vancouver to work intensively with the choir. The works are then presented at Chor Leoni's annual C4 event, where the compositions are sung and our audience can interact and ask questions of the composer. Ultimately, a winner is chosen by votes from a panel of judges, the Chor Leoni singers, and the live audience. The joy and beauty of C4 comes from illuminating the process of bringing new music into the world, and with sharing the journeys of each composer with our audience. Not only does C4 hope to bring insight into each of these amazing new choral works, but also with the remarkable people who created them.
I started from this idea that we live in a world, a very noisy world. Whenever we go out, you're going to get music blaring on speakers, in shopping centers. You're going to get ambulances, fire trucks going in the street. You're going to get, the odd cousin who speaks all the time. So this is something that I've always found to be, something of a pet peeve of mine, that we, as a society, we've sort of lost the art of being silent and just listening more than we produce noise, or that we talk more. And so this is how I came to choose this poem that really talks about all different kinds of silence. The silence of nature, the silence of the woods, the silence of someone who can't speak, the silence of the dead. So I said, okay, this is great. It's a great text a very pregnant text to be able to set that to music. This piece is a pre-pandemic piece. I delivered the piece to Erick 1 week before everything shut down. And so I'm reflecting now 2 years down the road. This was supposed to be written in January and then for a June performance. And it became a June performance 2.5 years later. So it would be a very different piece. You have to know that this is the very first piece that I've ever composed for a men's choir, and it gave me a taste to write more. So that's a good thing, because it can also be the opposite. You can say, okay, I wrote, in this case it's a men's choir, but you could write a piece, I don't know, for flute, cello and harp, and then discover, oh, this is really not my voice, or this is not really something, it's not a combination that suits me well as a composer. So this is something I learned here, that, oh, okay, a men's choir is something, I already have a few ideas for further exploration. So that's actually quite important.
So I was looking for something West Coast related, and I don't recall exactly how I came to wanting to look at life in the ocean on the West Coast, but somehow that's where I turned. And so I began actually by going to the university library and looking at a textbook on marine biology, the type of textbook that biology students, I imagine, would be studying earlier on. And I started reading the introduction on the history of the field, and remarkably, there was some discussion of early contributors, including an unlikely contributor to the field, a man by the name of Charles Scammon, who was a captain of a U.S. whaling ship in the 19th century. And as horrifying as whaling, commercial whaling seems to us today, yet marine biologists to this day recognize his immense contributions to the science of marine mammals. What I was looking for was that kind of observation of perhaps wonder on the part of the writer about the sea, about the animals. And as I kept reading through it, I started to find some glimmer of hope, some phrases here and there. And finally, when I got to the chapter on the Pacific white-sided dolphin, I became thrilled, because here was a chunk of writing that was like a diary entry about a moment at midnight on a still sea, when the sailors on this ship were surprised by a visit of a large herd of dolphins that surrounded the ship for an hour and just were playing around the ship and jumping and plunging and doing what dolphins do. And the way that the words describe this moment was just wonderful, because it's a whaling ship, and here they're not doing the whaling, they're not hunting, they're just watching with awe. Well, at least the captain is relating this in his entry, and I thought that was remarkable. And the writing is poetic, in fact. It's very colorful and has a lot of imagery that is appealing. And also the encounter so happens to have a nice musical arc, where it begins in stillness. There's the arrival of the dolphins. They don't know exactly what's happening. First, they think it might be a hailstorm. But then as they approach, they realize these are the dolphins. They play around, and he describes them, and then they disappear. And then it's quiet again. So it has a nice arc, and that's what appealed to me.
In a few moments the vessel was surrounded by myriads of white-sided dolphins, white-sided darting high and falling sidewise with a spiteful splash and report. Darting high and falling sidewise with a spiteful splash.
Well, the piece is a diary entry of a captain on a ship describing this wonderful encounter with the natural world. And the way I imagined interpreting that musically in my setting is not just an individual diary entry, but I imagine it as sort of a ballad told collectively by not just the captain, but all the sailors aboard. So what I hope is that the audience might get that feeling that we're gathered around these sailors who are completely awestruck by what they just experienced, and the captain might be leading off with the narrative, but then individual sailors or groups of sailors chime in and embellish the story and confirm what he's saying and add more. And so in fact, many of the lines are repeated for that very purpose, so that you hear it once and then you hear the same text reinterpreted, slightly changed, embellished. So there's a growing excitement, I think, as the piece unfolds. And so if I'd be thrilled if the audience can imagine they're maybe standing on board this ship and being told this story and trying to get enthralled by the story. It's a narrative piece, and so that's what I would hope they might get from it.
So my piece, Bell Tower, is set to a lovely text by German poet Rilke, actually an English translation of that poem by American poets Anita Barrows and Joanna Macy. In this poem, I came across early in the COVID-19 pandemic, just as I was beginning writing this piece, and I was so struck by it, by how it describes the meaning of pain and uncertainty in our world. At a time where I was overcoming grief in my own life, loss of work, loss of my babcha at the time, I think something a lot of us were dealing with early in the pandemic. Just the way it describes what the point of all of this is in our life. And the way Rilke puts it is that if we don't shy away from the pain in our lives, if we lean into it in a way and embrace it, that pain doesn't stay static. It turns into love and increases our capacity to live life full of love and live life fearlessly. And I thought that was such a beautiful way to describe what we are all going through and a way to look at things. So thinking about a couple things in the piece that are very me, I really like to use something called aleatory in my music, which is where I give individual performers within the choir some autonomy to do things at different times. So there's a couple little glimmers of that happen where I'll ask them to, on a pitch, I'll repeat the text at different times, or have a melody that they all get to come in at different times on. And I like that because it creates an interesting, more complex texture, while not actually having to write, a million different vocal lines. And I think the choir has a lot of fun doing that kind of thing too. feel like it's really hard to pick a word to describe the feeling. Maybe cathartic in a way of hearing the piece for the first time, because it was something that I had written at such a distinct moment in time and in my life, I think. I always find that every piece of mine is a little bit like a time capsule of the things happening in that time. And so there was a lot of feelings flowing when I got to hear it for the first time. Because of that, it was my first premiere post-pandemic as well, so I think that enhanced it. But also, you know, having wanted to work with Chor Leoni for so long, I've always been a huge fan of men's choirs, and Chor Leoni is, you know, one of the top in Canada, if not, you know, I'd say across North America. So after all that time, it was amazing to hear it.
It was thrilling to hear the piece for the first time, especially with the delay of over 2 years from the time I'd written it. You know, sometimes the first time you hear a piece, you're very nervous and you're worried that the way you imagine it is not going to come across well. And I have to say that from the very first few bars, I was immediately reassured and just kind of sat back and enjoyed the moment. And I find, you know, when you can reach that point where you're actually just enjoying the performance, you're in a good place.
How can I describe the feeling of this is, I must say, it's one of the most wonderful things to hear your own music performed by any ensemble. It's even more powerful when it's choral music because it involves the voice. You know, it's more organic. The voice is not an object. You write for orchestra, you really write for people that are playing music through an object. With singing, the object is the human body. So there's an immediacy, there's an organicity that you don't get elsewhere. And it's a men's choir, so there's a special vibration, there's a special quality in the grain, I would say, in the way music is spun, that's very different from a mixed choir.
It's a wonderful opportunity for any composer, obviously, to write a piece for such a high-class, talented choir and to go through that process. But there's a lot of support, and I was really impressed by the care and thought that Chor Leoni has put into the whole process.
The collaborative process is very, very rare, you know, that we get this long development period like we do with C4. So I think take full advantage of that. Ask questions, don't be afraid, because we're all learning, we are all here and want to make beautiful art.